I married her as a man. That's how the photos look, that's how the guests remember it, that's how my family still tells the story. I was standing straight in a dark suit, shoulders stiff, jaw tight, smiling the kind of smile you practice in a mirror so no one notices how badly your hands are shaking. She was glowing, calm, almost amused, like she already knew something I didn't. Or maybe like she knew something about me that I was still afraid to admit even to myself. People think weddings are about love, but mine was about survival. I had spent my whole life performing a role that everyone applauded. Good son. Responsible man. Future husband. Every step felt heavy, but I kept walking because stopping felt impossible. Inside, there was a quieter voice, softer, asking questions I never answered. I buried it under routine, under responsibility, under the belief that marriage would finally fix me. She and I met in a way that felt ordinary enough. Coffee, conversations, long walks where she listened more than she spoke. What drew me to her wasn't fireworks, it was safety. She looked at me like she could see the cracks and wasn't scared of them. Sometimes her gaze lingered a second too long, thoughtful, like she was reading a page I didn't know was open. The first months of marriage were gentle but strange. She never pushed me into being more masculine, never teased me the way some partners do. Instead, she would ask small questions that stayed with me for days. Do you feel comfortable in that? Does this feel like you? At first, I thought she was just unusually kind. Later, I realized she was unusually patient. One evening changed everything, though it didn't feel dramatic at the time. We were unpacking boxes, tired, laughing at how chaotic our new home looked. She pulled out a neatly folded piece of clothing that wasn't mine. Or at least, wasn't supposed to be. A soft fabric, delicate, unmistakably feminine. My heart stopped. I waited for shock, anger, confusion. Instead, she smiled, slow and calm, and said, "I was wondering when you'd notice." I wanted to explain, to deny, to joke it away. Words tangled in my mouth. My face burned with a shame I'd carried since childhood, the kind that teaches you silence before it teaches you truth. She didn't rush me. She sat beside me on the floor, close but not touching, giving me space while making it clear she wasn't leaving. That night, I told her things I had never said out loud. About mirrors I avoided. About clothes that felt wrong and others that felt like relief. About the fear that loving her as I was would destroy everything. She listened, eyes steady, and when I finished, she said something that shook me more than any accusation ever could. She said, "I didn't marry you because you were a man. I married you because you were honest with me, even when you didn't know how to be honest with yourself." I thought that was the end of it. A confession, a shared secret, tucked away to keep the peace. I was wrong. That was only the beginning. Over the weeks that followed, she started doing something subtle, almost invisible. She would invite me into her world, never dragging, never forcing. Sit with me while I chose clothes. Teach me how to move gently instead of rigidly. Laugh with me, not at me, when I felt awkward and unsure. The scariest part wasn't the change. It was how right it felt. How quiet my mind became when I stopped pretending. And how terrified I was of what that meant. Because if this felt true, then the man I married her as was only half the story. One night, as we stood in front of the mirror together, she adjusted my posture and said softly, "You don't have to be my husband the way the world expects. You can be my partner the way your heart needs." In that reflection, I didn't see a joke or a mistake. I saw someone on the edge of becoming real. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment my marriage stopped being about who I was pretending to be and started becoming about who I was brave enough to become. And slowly, lovingly, she wasn't just supporting my change. She was guiding it. After that night with the mirror, something shifted between us, not loudly, not suddenly, but like a tide you don't notice until the water is already around your ankles. She never announced changes. She never said, "Now you will do this," or "Now you must be that." Instead, she began to rearrange our world in tiny, careful ways that felt intentional only in hindsight. She started calling us a team instead of husband and wife when we were alone. At first, I didn't catch it. Then one day I did, and my chest tightened in a way that wasn't fear. It was relief. The labels I had been suffocating under were loosening, thread by thread. She gave me permission to exist without explaining myself. There were days I resisted. Days I snapped back into the role everyone knew, voice deeper, movement sharper, as if I could scare the truth back into hiding. She let me. That was the hardest part. She didn't correct me or look disappointed. She just waited. And somehow, that patience made my defenses useless. The first time she asked me to wear something of hers openly, not as a secret, not as a joke, my hands trembled so badly I thought I'd drop it. The room felt too bright. The walls felt like witnesses. I kept saying maybe later, maybe another day. She nodded, stepped back, and said okay. Then she added, but know this, you are safe with me, no matter what you choose. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Her words kept repeating in my head. Safe with me. I realized how foreign safety felt when it came to my identity. I had always thought love meant endurance. She was teaching me that love could also mean permission. When I finally did it, days later, it wasn't dramatic. No music, no tears. Just me standing there, heart racing, waiting for the world to end. It didn't. She smiled, adjusted a small detail, and said, there you are. 3 words. That's all. But they landed like a truth I had been searching for my whole life. What followed wasn't a fantasy transformation. It was awkward and human and slow. I learned how to sit differently, not because I had to, but because it felt natural. I learned how to soften my voice without forcing it. I learned that femininity wasn't weakness, it was awareness. And every lesson came wrapped in care, never control. But with every step forward, a shadow grew behind me. The world outside our home still saw me as her husband. Calls from family, jokes from friends, expectations stacked like bricks on my chest. I began to live 2 lives, and the weight of that secret started to crack me open. One evening, after a particularly hard phone call where I laughed at jokes that felt like knives, I broke down. I told her I was afraid. Afraid of losing everyone. Afraid of being laughed at. Afraid that I was becoming something people would never forgive. She held my face and said something that scared me more than any threat. She said, maybe you don't need forgiveness. Maybe you need alignment. That word stayed with me. Alignment. Not approval. Not permission from the world. Just the courage to stand straight in my own truth. She wasn't pushing me toward becoming her wife yet. Not in words. But in how she treated me, how she spoke to me, how she slowly shifted the balance between us, it was happening. I noticed it in the smallest moments. The way she took the lead without asking. The way she introduced decisions as us but carried them like her responsibility. The way she protected me when I was too fragile to protect myself. Somewhere along the line, I stopped being the one the world expected to lead. And strangely, I didn't feel diminished. I felt held. One night, she said, half joking, half serious, you know, you're much happier when you stop trying to be my husband. I laughed it off, but inside, something settled. Because deep down, I knew she was right. I was changing, not into a caricature, not into a fantasy, but into someone honest. And the scariest realization of all was this. I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to be him again. I married her as a man. But somewhere in those quiet evenings, those patient lessons, those moments of safety, she was reshaping our marriage itself. And I could feel a question forming that I wasn't ready to ask yet. The question didn't stay quiet for long. It followed me through ordinary days, through grocery trips where she naturally walked a step ahead, through conversations where people addressed me as sir and something inside me flinched. I began noticing how often I looked to her before speaking, how often I waited for her cue. It wasn't submission the way movies make it look. It was trust. And that realization scared me more than anything else. One evening, while folding laundry, she said something so casually that I almost missed it. She held up one of my shirts, paused, then placed it in a separate pile and said, "We don't really need these anymore, do we?" My first instinct was panic. Those shirts were armor. Proof. Evidence that I still belonged to the version of myself the world accepted. I opened my mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I felt grief. Real grief. For a role I had played my whole life, For a man I tried so hard to be. She noticed my silence and softened instantly, apologizing, saying we could keep everything. But I shook my head. For the first time, I didn't want to protect that version of me. I wanted to mourn him. That night, I cried in her arms like I never had before. Not loud, not dramatic, just deep, exhausted tears. She didn't tell me to be strong. She didn't tell me everything would be okay. She just held me and whispered, "You don't have to disappear to become yourself." And somehow, that made letting go possible. The shift became visible after that. She started referring to me differently when we were alone. Pet names that carried warmth, not expectation. She would say things like, "You're so thoughtful, you're so graceful," and for the first time, compliments didn't feel like lies I had to live up to. They felt like reflections. I began taking on roles in our relationship that I had once been ashamed to want. Caring for our home in ways that felt nurturing. Expressing emotions without filtering them through toughness. Letting her be the one who handled confrontation, decisions, protection. Each time I stepped back, the world didn't collapse. It expanded. The hardest moment came when she asked me a direct question. We were sitting quietly, the kind of silence that feels earned. She looked at me and said, "Have you ever imagined being my wife? Not as a joke. Not as a fantasy. As a life." My heart raced. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, to say that's impossible, that's not how things work. But another part, the truest part, answered before fear could stop it. I said yes. Barely audible. And once the word was out, it felt like a door slamming open. She didn't celebrate. She didn't rush. She just nodded, like something had finally aligned. She said, "Then we don't need to rush labels. We just need to be honest with ourselves." That honesty changed everything. From that day on, the dynamic between us settled into something unmistakable. She led. I followed. Not because I was weak, but because I was free. Still, the outside world loomed. Family gatherings became performances I could barely sustain. My body language shifted, my expression softened, and people noticed. Questions started coming. Jokes. Side glances. Every comment felt like a test I was failing. I started avoiding mirrors again, not because I hated what I saw, but because I was afraid of how much I loved it. The breaking point came at a family dinner. Someone made a comment about how marriage changes a man, how I seemed different, quieter. Everyone laughed. I forced a smile, but my hands were shaking under the table. She noticed. She reached over, squeezed my fingers, and said calmly, "Maybe different isn't a bad thing." The table went silent. In that moment, she chose me over comfort, truth over ease. On the way home, I told her I couldn't keep living half visible. I said I was tired of being brave only in private. She listened, then asked the question that changed the shape of my life. She said, "Are you ready to let our marriage reflect who we really are?" I didn't answer right away. Because saying yes meant losing the last shield I had. But it also meant gaining myself. I took a breath and nodded. And in that quiet car, I felt something settle into place. I wasn't her husband trying to become someone else. I was becoming her wife, not in title yet, but in truth. The path ahead terrified me. But for the first time, fear wasn't louder than hope. And as she reached for my hand, leading me forward without dragging me, I realized something profound. I hadn't been changed against my will. I had been seen into existence. Once the decision was spoken, even without witnesses, even without announcements, our home changed. Not in decoration, not in routine, but in energy. The pretending stopped. The hesitation softened. I no longer woke up wondering which version of myself I had to be that day. With her, I was simply me. And that simplicity felt revolutionary. She began introducing changes not as experiments, but as facts of our shared life. How we planned our days. How we spoke about the future. The way she stood slightly in front of me in public, subtle but deliberate, like a shield. I noticed how naturally people responded to her confidence, how easily they followed her lead. And I noticed how calm I felt letting her carry that weight. The first time she called me her wife, it wasn't dramatic. No ceremony, no announcement. We were laughing over something small, and she said, "You know, my wife would love this." Then she froze, watching my face carefully, ready to apologize, ready to retreat. But I didn't feel shock. I felt warmth. Like a name I had always been waiting to answer to. I didn't correct her. I smiled. And in that smile, something irreversible happened. I wasn't acting anymore. I wasn't imagining. I was accepting. Telling the world didn't happen all at once. It happened in fragments. One honest conversation. One boundary set. One relationship lost. One unexpected ally found. Not everyone stayed. Some people couldn't understand why a marriage would change its shape instead of breaking. Some thought love had rules. I learned, painfully, that not everyone is capable of seeing transformation as truth. But those losses made space. Space for peace. Space for alignment. Space for a version of me that didn't flinch at my own reflection. I learned how to walk with my head held high, not because I was proud in the way the world measures pride, but because I was no longer divided inside. Our marriage became quieter, deeper. She never treated me like a secret. Never like a joke. Never like a project. She treated me like a partner who had finally stepped into the right place beside her. The world still called us husband and wife sometimes. We let them. Titles mattered less than reality. One evening, standing together much like that first night at the mirror, she adjusted my posture again, smiled, and said, "Look at you. You're home." And for the first time in my life, I believed it. I married her as a man because that was the only way I knew how to survive. She didn't take that man away from me. She thanked him for carrying me this far, and then she let me rest. She made me her wife not through force, not through shame, but through love that was brave enough to tell the truth. This isn't a story about losing masculinity. It's a story about gaining wholeness. About choosing courage over performance. About a marriage that didn't end when the roles changed, but finally began. And if there's one thing I want anyone listening to understand, it's this. Transformation doesn't always look like rebellion. Sometimes it looks like trust. Sometimes it looks like surrender. And sometimes, it looks like standing beside the person who saw you before you ever saw yourself. I married her as a man. But she made me her wife.